Morning, everybody. Welcome to the New Pass session. New Pass is a white tea from Fujian province. White tea in Fujian province, that means it's from one of three places normally. That would be Jinyang, Zhenghe, or Fuding. Turns out it's from Zhenghe. It's a small leaf varietal. It is not the varietal you normally see a lot of for white tea. There is actually history behind doing small leaf varietals for white tea, but that's not the usual, or that's not what the bulk of white tea is. The bulk of white tea, if it's from Zhenghe or Fuding, is usually the large leaf white varietals. Each area has their own white varietal. What's special about the small leaf white varietal is it's not related, it's more related to the original tea plants that were growing there. And it's kind of like an animal that has several sources. In other words, it's not purebred. And actually, let's get away from that description, because that implies one thing is better than the other. And that's not what I'm trying to imply here. Really, what I'm saying is that these aren't imported plants from anywhere else, and that they locally grew. And even though they're not the most popular, they do hold a percentage, an interesting percentage of the white tea production in China. All right. Last week, we talked somewhat about history. I realized that there were a few things that I left out last week. I want to start off on that foot right now. So, white tea, what a complicated history. You have all these people writing, in quotes, in official sources. Oh, yeah, white tea was at this time, it started in this place, it started being produced at that time. And you know what? If you look at how these things are said carefully, you understand that everybody's hedging their bets. They're hedging their bets because they don't know. We don't know for sure the first time white tea became a thing, so to speak. We do know that there's all these emperors who seem to write some poetry about white tea, and we know that they're not talking about the white tea process. They're talking to them about an albino green tea. That's different than white tea, because the albino green tea was still done in the green tea process. So don't be fooled. And I see more and more of this. And it happens because when people are trying to carve out territory and they're trying to say, oh, yeah, my white tea is the original white tea. And when the thought goes through their mind, oh, yeah, social media, let's create a story that will be, really eye-catching. Yes.
Kind of makes one also wonder then about how little processing still qualifies white tea as white tea.
Interesting question. All right, so let's attack that question right away because I get it. What is the processing of white tea? This dovetails to almost exactly where I was going to go anyway. So let's see. Let me think. What do you have to do? Oh, you have to pick the leaves first. And what level do you pick the leaves? What a lousy question. You know why? Because what level? What does that mean? What I'm asking is, are you picking a bud and leaf, bud and three leaves, or just leaves and no buds? So you're making that decision. You're almost never making the seasonal decision, because almost all white tea is spring tea. So that is in essence already done for you. So you pick, you wither. This withering, let's see, you know what? I did that so fast that I skipped a really interesting step. You bring it back to the processing area. And I've been to some of these processing areas in the middle of the night, and they are a beehive of activity. Why? They're certainly not picking in the middle of the night. They can't see. But when they bring back everything, they start to categorize. First level of kind of deciding where this tea might end up. And so they make a decision, well, do these have possibilities to be silver needle? Yeah, but oh, do these have possibilities to be imperial white peony? Okay, bud and a leaf. Or is this going to be a standard white peony? Or is this going to be a Taoist eyebrows? Or is this going to be a spring tribute? So a Gungmei, a Shomei, are we going to use a different varietal altogether? So all of these decisions are being made usually starting at around 9 p.m. at night, going all the way to about 2 a.m. And the stuff keeps coming in, they keep sorting, and eventually they get it to the withering shed, because you can't leave that stuff outside to be withered. You know, withered under moonlight? Well, I guess you could if there were moonlight. But what if fog sneaks in there and leaves get all wet? That's kind of a fail. That's a big fail. So no, it's always in the shed. And then the next morning they come out and they start to make further decisions. They don't make them quite yet. What they do is they first wither in the sunlight if they're going to use withering by sunlight. Why would you use withering by sunlight versus not withering by sunlight? Well, if it's raining, it's very inconvenient to do withering by sunlight. You don't have sunlight. If it is foggy and continuously foggy, that's a little bit inconvenient as well. And therefore, you might choose to bake at a very low temperature. But normally, you're in that period of picking. For the most part, you don't get much rain. The rain really comes post April 4th, pre-April 4th, and these are all pre-April 4th picks. You usually don't get much rain, and the fog is usually thinner, and therefore by 9 o'clock is gone. And remembering that Zhenghe is interior, Fuding is on the ocean. So you got different things going in different microclimate terroirs, but certainly where I'm talking about today, by 8, 9 o'clock, the fog is gone, if there wasn't any to begin with. So you're out there, you're withering in the sunlight. You wither for, depending on what type of farmer you are. That was a backhanded way of saying something. Let's back away from that and describe this a different way. Depending on what your end result is supposed to be. In other words, are you going to be in the premium category? Are you going to be in a regular category? Or are you going to be in market tea category? So if you're going to be in the premium category, then you're very careful about how you're withering. And you usually will wither up to a week, although some farmers get away with withering 3 days, sometimes a little less. Sometimes they use a combination of withering and baking. Again, very low temperature. What do you want as a result out of that? Okay, we're in the second step here. It took me a long time to get to step 2, but I've actually been in it for the last 5 minutes. The withering, what you want to do is get the amount of moisture down to around 10 to 15% left in the leaf. So from a nice, beautiful looking, say a bud and a leaf, and you want to get that down to about 15% moisture. And as such, when you go through that process, you're obviously looking what's happening to it. What does withering do from a taste perspective? I know all of you were thinking, well, you told me everything except that. From a taste perspective, the tea slash grassiness goes away. You get rid of the grassy aroma, the grassy taste. Yes.
Peter asks, is Fuding mostly famous for white tea or other types of tea as well?
So, great question. Is Fuding famous solely for white tea, or do they do other types of tea? If you ask the man on the street in China, they would tell you, oh, yeah, I know Fuding, home of white tea. Home of white tea is problematic. I mean, Zhenghe claims to be the home of white tea as well. Doesn't matter what the claims are. Let's just say both of those areas are very well known for white tea, primarily well known for white tea. In fact, let me think about this. I think, I left out Jinyang. Those three areas in Fujian province account for, this number seems too high to me, but I think it's the correct number, 90+% of white tea. So they're doing white tea is what they're doing. And all the hagiography, in other words, all the stories and the myths and the legends and so forth, they all come from these areas. They don't come from any other areas. This is really white tea. So Fuding, let's think that it only does white tea. Are there any farmers who, while nobody is looking, process any other type of tea? There's probably one or two farmers who do. I don't know any, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were one or two who did. Yes.
Are the processing modalities different then between those three areas?
Great question. I named three areas. They're all within Fujian province. They're all within 150 miles of one another. Do they do everything exactly the same? And the answer is, of course not. Let's think of why that has to be the answer. It has to be the answer, and this is what I was leading into with Zhenghe. It has to be the answer because the microclimate terroir is different. Oh, it actually happens that the physical terroir is different also. So the result is some will wither, some will tend to do more cooking inside, think Fuding. Some will tend to do almost all that they can get away outside, Zhenghe, and then some have a mix, Jinyang. So that's kind of a rule of thumb in terms of thinking about it. Are they doing any steps so radically different? Occasionally. So occasionally, and we don't have any examples here, there is one type of white tea where they actually roll it. Now that's very unusual. And like I said, we don't have any of that here. So for the intents and purposes of here, these are close enough. They're close enough to say the same. They're not the same. Electronically doing stuff in Fuding because the climate is wetter, the climate is more foggy. It's just they have invested in the infrastructure to do the indoors, in quotes, withering. It's not really withering in the same way that when you do it outdoors, because outdoors, you're relying on the sun. Indoors, you're relying on an oven. So you set a temperature, maybe 20, maybe 70 or 80 degrees, and that would be Fahrenheit. Outdoors, you want temperatures that have a range. And so you're not setting as precisely. Oh, that was a bold statement. You're not setting at all. You're receiving the energy. What you are doing, however, to mediate that is they have them in rollers stacked. And so the top one gets sun for an hour or however much it's supposed to get sun for. You take that out, put that on the bottom, everything moves up. And so you keep rotating that throughout the day. So there are many ways to control what the end result is going to be. And these guys have been doing this for years and years.
Do we know whether not just temperature, but speed of withering time impacts the chemical content of the tea leaves?
Great question. So this is a really interesting question because when we think of white tea, it is the least processed of all teas. So what does that imply? That implies it has the most, let's see, the most constituents, chemical constituents of tea. And that's a correct implication. So let's go back to the question again.
About whether or not, and to back up, in other presentations, you have noted that sometimes there are different chemical contents that are outcomes from temperature, not just from where something is grown. So I was wondering whether speed of withering, not just temperature, impacts the final chemical constituents.
It does. So this is really a question about speed of withering. And so it makes sense for Fuding, where everything is controlled. For the most part, everything is controlled in a baking facility versus when you're doing it outside, because you're looking for a result in the leaves when you're doing it outside. You're more formulaic when you're doing it in an oven. And therefore, are the chemical constituents going to have some differences? The answer is not only are they going to have some differences, they're going to have differences also because they're different varietals. Are these differences enough for us to go to Sophie's and think to ourselves, okay, I've been feeling that my skin needs more help, and therefore, I want the one that has the most help for the skin. What scientists would currently tell you in China is they don't exactly know that answer. They're trying to suss that out. And once they suss it out, then the real question would be, okay, it's got more of the polyphenols, which are one may have more of the polyphenols beneficial to the skin. I want that one. And they'll tell you under what circumstances that might be the case, but we're not there yet. This is still undergoing lots of testing. We're in babyhood in terms of understanding all the constituents. We're in babyhood about the particular areas that have been where the constituents are helpful to the body. Earlier this week, Peter sent to me an article about glycation and the after results of that in a person and how harmful that is. And scientists are working from many different angles to try and see if they can ameliorate this. And this particular article that he sent me talks about actually developing an enzyme which in effect is a cleanser. You take it, it wipes out all of these products of glycation, and then all of a sudden you wake up one morning, you look at the picture you took yesterday morning before you drank that cleanser before going to bed. Oh my God, I am 20 years younger because all these ugly products are out of the way. Turns out in the tea arena, lots of research is going on in terms from a different angle of whether the constituents, particularly in white and green tea, in green tea, everybody's looking at the EGCG. In white tea, they're not only looking at that, but they're also looking at a few other constituents. And I think, because I really looked hard at this week, I think the answer is, no, I know the answer is they don't know yet. And part of the issue is the instability of evidence or the inefficiency of gathering evidence related to the human body. And this is really important because, you do it in a test tube, one thing happens and you think, yeah, let's store it up because I want that deglycation. And you drink it, like, I don't feel any different. Obviously, all these things take time, right? And so I don't want to imply that there's anything magic that you can take right now. But really, what I'm trying to talk about is this is a fascinating subject. And in a way, if you think about tea and Taoism, oh, you didn't know we were going to go there today. It's always on my mind. If you think about tea and Taoism, what were the Taoists interested in? They were interested in that elixir of long life. So what are we talking about right now? We're talking about this in relationship, the same way the Taoists were thinking about, well, I got to experiment with these things and see if the elixir of long life is in there. So scientists using obviously a different methodology are doing that. Specifically on this particular set of products, both the green and the white tea, and for different reasons. Okay, I did go far afield, but I still remember where I am. We're still withered. After we wither, we go into a balancing. You've never mentioned balancing before. As you take the car and you balance the tires so every tire hits the road at the same time. It's kind of like that because the artisanal white tea farmers start to think, okay, which of these batches might I blend together to formulate the final package that I'm going to do for this particular type? Silver needle, there's more of a channel, right? Because you're working with bud only. But once you get out of that channel widens. And so you have choices. And what are these choices about? Choices are about flavor profile. Actually, even within the silver needle, those channels and choices are about flavor profile. So the white tea farmer, particularly in Zhanghe, looks to balance, and then at some point, maybe the blend. And blend by type. So this is not a blend. Oh, I'm going to take some from here, and I'm going to experiment and mix a little with here and see what the flavor is. No, this is blending on a much larger scale because these guys are producing tons of tea. They are on the market, white peony, bang. My white peony actually has several different farms because I want a certain effect. And that's a flavor, usually effect. Yes.
So when you say by type, you're referring to type of pick.
Yes, that's exactly right. So by type, that instead of calling it type of pick, even though that's technically correct, let's talk about it as how I'm going to get to the market, that type. So I'm going to do just buds. Now, within that just buds, there's choices, aren't there? Because it's a bud and a fish hook leaf, or, oh, it's buds only. I mean, that all is in that narrow channel of silver needle. Once you get to white peony, oh, I'm going to give you the really great white peony. And you know what? I'm going to call mine Imperial. And that way you'll know it's right there at the top of the heap. And it's going to be a one bud and one semi-mature leaf. That's what I'm going to do. That's how you're going to advertise. So that's really what I mean. And then you get to the Gourmet and the Chaumet. One has almost no buds, one has a few buds. And so there's less, well, there's still consistency even within those categories as well. The silver needle, there's absolutes about that. You can't accidentally say, oh yeah, I put in a leaf or two of the imperial white peony and left that in with the silver needle. Nobody does that. And that would look foolish. That would look like you don't know what you're doing. So I've gone through essentially the steps. Balance, blend. You get the water level down to usually the moisture level within the leaf, 3 to 4%. You sort to make sure everything really is the category you think it is, and you package. So that's really the full processing story. How did this all come about? This all came about, and I started this discussion because I wanted to complete the history, and then I wandered off into a bunch of other territories. I am going to complete the history, and then we'll get your thirst quenched. So, in the late 1700s, it appears safe to say that silver needle, strike that white tea was hitting the market, the tea market. It seems safe to say that. You have lots of people in China. Oh yeah, I'm lineage. Mine was in that first batch in the 1700s. And that would have, again, been at the end of the 1700s. I've seen enough evidence that it wouldn't surprise me at some point if there was absolutely solid proof. Where we have unimpeachable proof is white tea began to be popular in Europe in the late 1800s. By the 1900s up to 1915, that thing was growing at a huge pace. How did it show up in Europe all of a sudden? Interesting story. Europe was drinking red tea, right? Cheeman and all those red tea producers, real happy drinking red tea. What were they doing packaging wise before they sent the tea? And this was in the 1800s. So if anybody tells you, oh yeah, this was going on in the 1700s, don't argue, just nod your head like that ain't true. Because it's not. We have no evidence of that. But in the 1800s, they actually used to sprinkle on the top, from an aesthetic point of view, white tea on the top. And so the boxes would come in, you open it up, oh, beautiful little white tea, and then the red tea, the rest of the whole box. And so eventually, at the end of the 1800s, people in Europe were saying, hey, give me that white stuff. I like that white stuff. And that was an impetus for white tea production to take off. And it was going great. Let's see, I said until 1915. Let me think. What might have changed things in that? Oh, World War I. So World War I made the export path into Europe very difficult. And as a result, in China, the demand for white tea from Europe went from this booming, growing year by year, more and more and more, zero, because they couldn't get it in. Of course, who could afford anything at that time also? That too. And so it really didn't recover until actually into the middle to late 1900s. Why is this? World War II wasn't helpful. Having a country trying to come out of Civil War, World War, and trying to get on a great economic path, that wasn't helpful. That was hard, really, really hard. White tea in particular was heavily affected because it wasn't the bulk of what Chinese were drinking. So the result is you didn't have officials saying, oh, give me my white tea. No, they were saying, give me my green tea. Give me my Dragon Well, Wong's Creation, Premier's Choice. Give me those teas. Those in the know were saying, hey, give me my Scarlet Road. So you had these really famous teas that in effect were protected because the demand from those in charge was sufficient to generate enough demand elsewhere because everybody imitated who was in charge. Yeah, I want that green tea. Give me my Dragon Well. Whereas nobody was saying, give me my Silver Needle. That really didn't start to happen until probably the 1980s, when all of a sudden there begins to be more interest. And then it picks up real steam in the early 2000s as there's the sense that, hey, white tea is pretty good. Where was the watershed mark? 2007 or 2008, when some scientists in China published this article which said, you know what, y'all, well, not you all. What actually was said, half of you should be drinking more white tea because your skin will end up being beautiful. And then all of a sudden, hey, where's my white tea? I like beautiful skin. All right. And you like not being thirsty. I catch the connection between that. So it is with my greatest respect and honor to bring forth the beautiful luminous tea master to make us not thirsty.
Yes.
Bijou.
Yes. Thank you. Hi, good morning. 大家好 We do 白茶 is white tea. I move my another session. Okay, the cup. Okay. So we do this the usually that two glass, but this is on purpose. This help me the dissipate steaming. Okay, John, help me please.
Yeah. Usual setup. She has an additional glass, helps dissipate the speed of dissipating the steam, has a tea pet to kind of protect the shop. Beautiful little plant offered up by a customer. So this is our setup this morning. White tea is done. Actually, white tea of all the teas is the most forgiving of mistakes. So tea that is done, white tea, when we travel, we're getting water at all sorts of temperatures. So the result is white tea can withstand water of all sorts of temperatures. It's not ideal. And the ideal for a new pass is 175 degrees. But if you're traveling somewhere and you can't control, it's like, okay, just give me the water, I'll make it work. And it'll work just fine. It won't, white tea, just because of that process, it's not going to go bitter. It will retain closer to its original flavor, even if there are wide variations in brewing temperature. All right. Tea master dissipating the steam, aerating the water. More importantly, she's present. When you do tea, you should be present if you can be. If you're present, what's the benefit of that? You'll appreciate all the varied flavors that you're about to experience. All right, she's getting the tea leaves. Putting them in the heated cup. Shaking, heating up the leaves. Transferring the water to the kettle because kettle has a good spout, easy to control the flow. This is new pass. Timing is 2 minutes. You know, she pours on the side. And you get some of the leaves on top that are still out there, not really leaching much or extruding much flavor. But these are the leaves that are going to extrude a lot of flavor during the second and third steeps. So this is a good way to brew this tea. And you already know that there's an effect because you can see already a color change within this tea, the tea water. The other thing you see right away is that the shapes of the leaves are a little bit more broken up here. So this one, as a smaller varietal, it gets broken up a little bit more. But you still have full buds in here. And you just have leaves that are a little bit more broken up. This, in years past, let's define that. Say in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have much of this coming in the market. Starting in the 2000s, you started to have much more of this coming to market. Why? Because the farmers started to look around, hey, we've got this Taita or this local varietals that are growing here. Let's experiment with those. Let's see flavor-wise, can we get a little additional flavor or different flavor? These farmers, in a way, when you think about it, the second revolution in China, after Deng Xiaoping came to power, second revolution was about thinking about things differently, doing things differently. And as people perceive, hey, I can do things differently, and there's going to be an interesting result. It's not always going to be the result I want, but there's going to be an interesting result. You start to see more of these experiments. It wasn't at the very beginning, but as people began to feel comfortable doing that, then you start to see more experimentation. All right. Tea master separated leaves from the tea water. Ooh, and right away we see lots of stuff in the tea water. We see lots of trichomes in the tea water. Nice color. I'm going to go ahead and enter the quality arena. 175 degrees sip. Astringency, aftertaste, and energetics. So right away, I get some astringency. Take some good notes. This will be different than last week's. It will be different than next week's. So last week, remembering we did Resplendent. That was a Fuding. This is Zhenghe. Next week, we're going back to Fuding. I'm going to take a second sip. Okay, I'm feeling the aftertaste now. I don't have much energetics yet, but I can see I'm going to get some energetics. All right. Make sure you take good notes because, again, you're going to have another great tea next week, another great white tea. We're going to want to draw some comparisons. Your turn to brew.
Jonathan asks, what grade of white tea is this considered? Guinea, Shoumei, Gongmei, or something else?
嗯，对，是应该是属于是哪一种？
那个
他说红梅、双梅或者
不属于白茶，不属于哪个品种，它就是
不是
在
品种，就是那个等级了。
等级啊，
对
等级不分等级，它是按那个季节，
对
按那个枝芽头来产。它是一个科学方面，按照一个
Yeah.
头采，就是取针
Yeah, yeah.
，take needles.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So this one's a little unusual. And while you're brewing, I'll talk about this one because this one doesn't belong to a class, unlike the traditional large leaf. And that's really the distinction here. This one is handled differently. It's what they pay attention to with this when they're picking is to make sure that they get some good buds in this. That's the key thing that they're looking for. But this certainly doesn't make it a bud tea. It's not a bud tea. It doesn't reach the level, and it's again because of size of leaf. It's just not considered a white pea, and it certainly isn't considered a gourmet or chaumet. So it's got its own separate categorization, and that's because of the length that it comes from.
Did you say earlier that this was a wild varietal,
Mhm.
local to the area?
It's what they call a Tsai Cha. So Tsai Cha literally means a vegetable tea. Now that tells you nothing.
菜茶，为什么？
That tells you nothing because I gave you a translation that's meaningless in terms of, oh, I'm sorry, in terms of what you should understand by this. That Thai really indicates it's a local varietal, and that's it. It's not in your line of traditional white tea varietals. So let's think about white tea varietals because these are all good questions. The main white tea varietals, there are three. One is Zhenghe large leaf. The second is Fuding large leaf. And then there is Suixian large leaf. So you have three distinct sets of varietals that all follow, and they're all largely that all follow this classification of whether it's a needle only or it's a needle and a leaf or two, or a needle and a bunch of leaves, or no needles at all. And obviously, it's easier when you're dealing with a large varietal because everything is so very obvious. And this is why white tea from other countries is such a mess, because it would like to follow in certain steps, but it doesn't really understand how the Chinese deal with exceptions. And this is an exception. And therefore, it's an exception only insofar as that it's this wild local variety. They're still treating it carefully, but great question. All right, so you're brewing. You set your timer for 2 minutes, and your timer is going to go off in 4 seconds.
Rob, I see stems among the leaves.
Yes, that's the other thing about Thai cha. You can see stems among leaves, and that would be totally unacceptable in the traditional, the big leafed stuff. Not unless, well, there is one exception even to that. But yes, there are some stems in this. Good catch. So go ahead and enter the quality arena. Tell me what you're sensing or detecting. And white tea is always fun because for me, and you'll pick this up because when you think of last week, you think of this week, and then after we do next week, you're going to get three very distinct, fun types of flavor and consistency profiles. Yeah.
Jennifer says the energetic of this tea with the first sip is very comforting and grounding.
Comforting and grounding energetic. That's absolutely a great observation. In China, we frequently hear this thought of comforting related to this tea. Easy to drink, right? Nothing sharp about this tea.
Jonathan says there is a clear viscosity of the tea water in my mouth, but it's still very clean.
Oh, love this comment. A clean, he called it clear viscosity. I think by that, what he means, clear is not translucent, but there's clearly viscosity and it's clean. And great observation on this. There clearly is viscosity, and it just gives you this. It's not. It doesn't leave you with any odd flavors or leave you thinking, God, I wonder, what happened here. This is the whole package in a very easy way to drink.
Jennifer says the taste is smooth and light, and yes, very easy to drink.
Smooth, light, and very easy to drink, Jennifer. Thank you. And that's really true. This one, this is a tea that if you're busy and you can't be present, and you know that you like this grounding and easy, then you make this for yourself and you get that benefit of you're able to drink it and it's not dissonant at all. You never have to worry about being dissonant. You're serving a guest, you don't have to worry about this being dissonant. Yeah.
Rob says the smell of the warm leaves was a mix of malt and umami. Then the steep leaves had a combination of malt and a hint of florality. Then the tea water was round, gentle on the nose, with hints of floral and almost a hint of vanilla.
Oh, interesting. So Rob talks about the tea water with being round, just a barest hint of floral and a barest hint of vanilla. That's versus the dried leaves, which have a hint of malt and umami, and the wet leaves, which have
malt and floral.
More malt and floral. I like this, and Rob clearly is thinking about this through the lens of a tasting or through the lens of trying to figure out from the start, being present and understanding the evolution of this tea as it's brewed. Great commentary. I particularly, I rarely think of vanilla, but in this case, when you mentioned it, yeah, I catch where you're going with this.
Rob says, I'm following my nose.
Hey, there you go. Me too. Okay. I have one more comment and then we'll close out. None of you commented yet on the interjects. Of course, I drank mine first, and it took a while for those interjects to get to me. Oh, go ahead.
Perhaps Peter's comment. We'll get there.
Okay.
I'm just reading it. Peter says, this has really taken me some sips to get a handle on it. Even the astringency was difficult to really bear down on or bore into. As I keep sipping, the astringency is building, and now it becomes clear. There's an aliveness and freshness. There was some distant echo of fruit or florality at first, but then it receded instead of building. feels like a tea whose class is defined by subtlety.
Oh, I love this. So Peter goes through a description here and ends up with this is a tea that is best defined as belonging to the class of subtle teas. There's definitely an aliveness and a freshness. And I like that you got to that part because the aliveness to me, and I'm gonna jump ahead here, actually implies a warmth. I did not expect to get a warmth from this tea, and yet I am. So for me, that's part of what's going on. Also, Peter talked about the buildup, gradual buildup of astringency at the beginning, and then it really struck. Okay, now I catch the astringency, and maybe it's floral, maybe it's fruity, and then the receding of that. And that's really interesting because this tea merits everybody's second look because it's got all these elements in play, but none of them, except kind of that grounding, um, fresh, clean, really retains all the way through.
Jennifer says, I'm curious about your thoughts on what makes a white tea good for combining with some other element, like event horizon. I don't recall which white tea is contained in the mandarin skin of event horizon, but I am curious, what type of thought goes into the decision making on how best to marry a white tea with something else?
This is a very great question. So Jennifer observes, all right, I've had tea in here which is somehow either in a mandarin orange or a clementine orange, or where the peel is used in a cake. And what would be the thought pattern behind either a producer or somebody in the tea industry combining the two, and why? And so, great question. Most of this decision making is driven by how's it going to seem on the market. Okay, very fair question, because you don't do something if you're only going to do it for yourself. You do it in the tea industry because you're going to put it on the market. And putting it on the market, you have to appeal to some aspect of what customers want. Well, what's in these citrus peels? These are Xinhui citrus peels. And what's the value of Xinhui citrus peels? Well, according to TCM, they take care of a bunch of problems within the human body. They kind of balance the human body. So the theme of white tea being good for you more than just cosmetically, but also for other things it can do in the body, has linked it with these Xinhui peels. And so farmers who do white tea actually, for the local market, by the way, they don't believe Americans would appreciate this. And we had the hardest time buying some of this tea because, the people argued with us. Oh, no, this is not a good selection. Only Chinese really appreciate this. Well, it turns out that is not true. And, we just had to call upstairs a few levels and finally, got that all taken care of. But there is this bias that because Westerners don't necessarily understand TCM very well, that they won't be able to appreciate it. But that's kind of the underlying thought about how these teas are put together.
Rob says this tea is thick on the tongue, but there's also a brightness to the sensation. The flavor is round and complex in such a way that one gets hints of things like cider, and then it quickly falls back behind a veil of blended flavors.
This is a great comment. So Rob talks about a roundness of flavor And then he actually started it with a brightness on the tongue. And I love that because it's not so bright that it's like a sun shining. Now that would be a different type of tea. What it is on your tongue, it keeps drawing you in to keep drinking. Talks about a clean flavor. He talks about other things, trying to come up and then going away, and that groundedness of the tea. Great comment.
Peter says, I'm finding this is a great white tea energetically. I like the grounding, warming energy of this. It balances the punch or pack of white tea energy. I'm feeling mental and visual acuity, but without losing my body.
Mental and visual acuity. I love this. This comes from Peter's talking about the energetics of this. Alive, grounding. I will tell you, this is a key comment because it's really identifying. This tells you something that I didn't tell you. These comments all point to one thing. Oh, you didn't just get this year. This must be aged to a degree. And the answer is yes, it is. It's old white tea. And old white tea has a different energetic, and it brings that heat. A few minutes ago, I told you, gosh, I'm unexpectedly warming up, and now I'm sweating. Why is that? It's because it's aged, and I'm getting that benefit of the agedness of this wine, that groundingness. And yet, going back to Rob's, gosh, there's this hint of brightness. And then back to Peter about, wow, this is really alive. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is aged very alive. Great comment. All right. I think I've come too close to the end of today's session. Love going through this session with you. I knew that this would be a bit of a surprising tea, especially compared to last week, Resplendent. Resplendent was great for all of the obvious reasons that one drinks white tea. This New Paths, on the other hand, is great because as an aged white tea, you're getting all these qualities, including a grounding, including the in and outs, the hints of citrus and floral, a cleanness, all these things that you all are detecting. And that's because this is aged very nicely. I wonder what next week's going to be about. Well, since at the very beginning I advertised we were going to do white teas only during this session, this means it's safe to say we're going to do a white tea next week. I wonder if it'll be volcanic. Oh no, that would be a cliff tea. Let me think about it. Maybe it will be an eruption. Next week, we're going to do eruption together. You're in for a wild ride. This is a Fuding tea. Look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, be healthy this week. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.